The priest had just asked if anyone objected. 800 people held their breath. And then the doors of the Grand Hyatt Seoul exploded open. Every head turned, every camera swung, and standing in the entrance in a blood-red dress, gold embroidery catching the chandelier light like fire, was a woman nobody in that room was supposed to know about. She was holding the hands of two little boys, mixed, Korean and Kenyan, 6 years old, and they had the groom's face, every single feature, his jaw, his eyes, his exact expression when he was trying to hold himself together. 800 people stopped breathing simultaneously. The groom Ryon Seo-jin, 34 years old, the most feared crime boss in Seoul. A man who had stared down assassins across 4 continents without blinking, went completely, utterly still. Because he knew her, he had loved her. 7 years ago in Nairobi he had made her a promise, and then he had gotten on a plane and never come back. Her voice cut through the silence of 800 people like a scalpel. "These are your sons, Seo-jin," not a whisper, a statement of fact, delivered to 800 witnesses, every camera in the room, and one man standing at an altar who had just watched his entire carefully constructed life detonate in a single sentence. But before we continue, kindly hit the subscribe button and tell us where you are watching from. Replaced with custom crystal 40,000 hand-cut pieces imported from Vienna, catching the light like frozen rain. White roses lined every surface, 12,000 of them, flown in from the Netherlands the night before. The scent was so thick it felt like breathing something expensive. Outside, black SUVs with tinted windows circled the venue in slow, deliberate rotations. Men in tailored suits stood at every entrance, earpieces in, hands clasped, eyes scanning. They didn't look like wedding security. Because they weren't. Inside, 800 guests sat in gilded chairs, arranged in perfect rows like pieces on a chessboard. Politicians, executives, crime lords dressed in designer suits, their wives dripping in jewelry that could fund small countries. Every face wore the same careful expression, respectful, watchful, slightly afraid, because the man getting married today was not a man you celebrated loosely. Ryon Seo-jin stood at the altar in a black tuxedo so perfectly cut it looked like it had been sewn directly onto his body. 34 years old, 6'1", broad shoulders, sharp jaw, dark eyes that had never once looked soft in a photograph. A faint scar ran along his left jaw line, a reminder of Busan, 7 years ago, a deal that almost cost him everything. He wore no expression, not joy, not nerves, not love, just control. That was what Seo-jin did best. He controlled rooms, he controlled outcomes, he controlled people, and today, marrying Park Mika-yoon-seo, daughter of the second most powerful syndicate in South Korea, he was controlling the future. His second-in-command, Director Choi, leaned close from the front row and whispered, "Everything is in position." Seo-jin gave one small nod. He didn't look at Choi. He kept his eyes forward, on the priest, on the moment, on the careful architecture of a life built around power and survival. The orchestra began. Mika appeared at the far end of the aisle. She was beautiful, no one could deny that. 28, pale and flawless in a white gown worth more than most people's homes. Her dark hair pinned with diamond clips. Her posture perfect. Her smile measured. Her eyes cool and calculated beneath the softness of her veil. She walked toward him like a queen walking toward a throne. The guests rose. Cameras flashed. Somewhere outside, reporters from 6 media outlets pressed against the barricades, hungry for any shot of the most secretive wedding Seoul had seen in a decade. Seo-jin watched Mika approach and felt nothing. Not cruelty, not coldness, just the familiar emptiness he had learned to call peace. This marriage was not about feeling, it was about alignment. 2 families, 2 territories. One agreement that would end 3 years of quiet, bloody tension between their syndicates. She reached him, took his hand. Her fingers were cool. The priest began to speak. Seo-jin let the words wash over him. Honor, commitment, witness, love, familiar sounds arranged in familiar order, none of them landing anywhere deep. He knew his lines. He had rehearsed them. He would say them cleanly, sign what needed signing, and then the work would begin. "If anyone here has cause to object to this union," the priest said, reaching the moment every wedding includes but no wedding ever expects to use, "speak now." There was silence. 800 people held perfectly still. The chandelier crystals caught the light, and then from the very back of the Grand Hyatt Seoul the doors exploded open. The The sound hit first. Both ancient wooden doors swinging wide, crashing against the walls, the bang ricocheting off marble floors and vaulted ceilings like a gunshot. 800 heads turned in one synchronized motion. Gasps followed a wave of them, rolling from the back of the room to the front, growing louder as people saw what was standing in the doorway. A woman, tall, composed, devastating. Dr. Amara Odiambo stood in the entrance of the Grand Hyatt's wedding hall, wearing a gown the color of fresh blood deep red silk, with gold embroidery along the neckline, traditional Kenyan beadwork woven into the fabric, her locks pinned up with amber pieces that caught the chandelier light like fire. She was 32 years old, and she looked like she had spent every one of those years becoming someone impossible to ignore. She was not shaking. She was not crying. Her chin was level. Her shoulders were back. Her dark eyes moved through the crowd with the calm, precise focus of a woman who had rehearsed this moment 10,000 times in her head and had long since made peace with every consequence of it. In her left hand, she held a small fist Kai, 6 years old, gripping her fingers with both of his tiny hands, his eyes enormous, scanning the giant glittering room like he had walked into another world. In her right hand, Koa, also 6, identical face, same wide eyes, but his jaw set with a stubbornness that looked heartbreakingly familiar to anyone who had spent 5 minutes studying the man standing at the altar. The boys were dressed in matching deep blue shirts. Their features stopped the room cold, mixed, Korean and Kenyan, woven together in 2 small faces. High cheekbones from one world, warm brown skin from another. Seojin's jaw, Amara's eyes. A combination that made zero biological sense to everyone in that room until it made complete and devastating sense. Someone dropped a phone. The clatter echoed. A crime lord in the third row leaned slowly to his wife and whispered something. She pressed her hand over her mouth. Mika's grip on Seojin's hand went rigid. Seojin did not turn around immediately. He felt the shift in the room before he understood it, the way the air pressure changed, the way 800 people stopped breathing at the same moment. His instincts, sharpened over a decade in the underworld, screamed at him that something irreversible had just walked through those doors. He turned, and the world stopped. 7 years collapsed in a single second. Nairobi, the rain, a back room in a private clinic, her hands pressing gauze against a wound in his side while she cursed at him in Swahili for being reckless. The first time she laughed. The last night before he left. The promise he made. The promise he broke. Amara's voice cut through the silence like a scalpel, clean, controlled, and absolutely lethal. 8. The 8. Kyer Grand Hyatt Seoul detonated. Chairs scraped. Voices erupted. Phones went up recording, photographing, live streaming. Security moved. Choi was on his feet. 2 of Mika's cousins grabbed each other's arms. A politician near the back was already on his phone, stepping toward the exit. Mika released Seojin's hand. He didn't notice. He was already walking not toward the chaos, not toward his men, toward her. Down the aisle, through the noise, his eyes locked on Amara's face, then dropping just once to the 2 small boys holding her hands. Kai pressed closer to his mother. Koa stared straight at Seojin with those familiar dark eyes and did not look away. Seojin stopped 3 feet in front of them. Up close, it was worse, or better. He didn't know which. The boys looked exactly like the photographs his mother used to show him of himself at that age. Same bone structure, same hairline, same slight furrow between the brows when they were uncertain about something. His chest did something he had no language for. He looked up at Amara. She met his eyes without flinching, without heat, without apology. Just that steady, quiet devastation. He remembered the look she gave him the morning he told her he had to leave Kenya, and could not tell her why. "You have a son who is dying," she said quietly, only for him now. "And I need your help." Behind Seojin, the Grand Hyatt Seoul was in full meltdown. His wedding 3 years in the making, 800 witnesses, 2 syndicate alliances hanging in the balance, was disintegrating in real time. He didn't look back. 7 years ago, Nairobi almost killed Ryun Seojin. Not the bullet. The bullet was nothing, a clean entry wound just below his ribs. The kind of injury a man in his world filed under occupational hazard and moved on from. What almost killed him was what happened after. What happened after had a name. Amara Odiambo. It was past midnight when Beg hammered on the clinic door in Lavington, Seojin bleeding through a pressed shirt in the back of a Land Cruiser, jaw locked, too proud to make a sound. The Nairobi air was thick and warm and smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. Somewhere nearby, someone was playing music, slow, deep, Afro beats drifting over compound walls like it had nowhere urgent to be. The door opened, and Seo Jin, who had stared down crime lords across 4 continents without blinking, felt something shift in his chest that had absolutely nothing to do with the bullet. She was 25. Scrubs, stethoscope. Hair pulled back, one loose curl escaping near her left ear. She looked at him the way doctors look at problems, fast, clinical, stripping away everything that isn't relevant. She was breathtaking, and she clearly did not care that she was breathtaking. That was the first thing that got him. Inside, she said. Not a question, not a please. Just a direction delivered with the quiet authority of someone who had clearly dealt with bleeding men at midnight before, and had long since stopped being impressed by any of them. Beck started to explain. Something about a misunderstanding, a business dispute. I don't need the story, Amara said, already snapping gloves on. I need him on the table. That was the second thing that got him. She worked without flinching. Her hands are steady, her eyes focused, completely maddeningly calm while she cleaned and sutured a gunshot wound like it was a minor inconvenience she intended to resolve efficiently and move on from. Studied her the way he studied every person who came within arm's reach of him looking for the angle. The nervousness. The tell that said she was scared of who he was or what he represented. There was nothing, no fear, no awe, no performance, just competence, worn so naturally it looked like breathing. You're staring, she said, without looking up. I'm observing. Men with bullet wounds don't usually have the energy to observe, she said. I'm not most men. She finally looked up at him, direct, flat, completely unintimidated. No, she said. You're a man who got shot at a business meeting in Nairobi and showed up at my door at midnight. Statistically, you are extremely common. Seo Jin almost smiled. He couldn't remember the last time someone had made him almost smile. He came back the next day. Medically, he didn't need to. The suture was clean, the wound was closing. She had given him everything he needed to manage it himself. He came anyway. He brought coffee, a Kenyan blend from a place near the university that she had mentioned once, briefly, the night before. A throwaway comment. He had filed it anyway, the way he filed everything, except this time the filing felt less like intelligence gathering, and more like paying attention. To her specifically. Because she had said it and he wanted to remember it. She opened the clinic door and looked at the coffee, then at him. I'm not your doctor anymore, she said. I know. Then why are you here? He didn't have an answer that wasn't embarrassing, so he held up the coffee instead. She stared at him for 5 full seconds. Then she stepped aside and let him in. 3 weeks. That was all they had. 21 days in Nairobi that Seo Jin had intended to spend finalizing a supply route deal and instead spent discovering what it felt like to be completely, helplessly known by another person. Because that was what Amara did. She saw through things. It wasn't a skill she performed. It was just how she existed in the world. She asked questions no one in his life ever asked. Not what do you control or what do you want, but what do you actually believe in, and what are you afraid of losing? And once, very quietly, over dinner on her clinic's back porch, while Nairobi glittered below them, do you ever get tired of being the hardest person in every room? He had looked at her for a long time before answering. Yes, he said. Just that. One word. She nodded, like he'd confirmed something she'd already known, and refilled his glass. He had never felt so exposed in his life. He had also never felt so light. They argued constantly. She was stubborn in a way that delighted and infuriated him. Simultaneously, she pushed back on everything, questioned everything, refused to be managed or redirected or charmed out of a position she'd decided on. He was used to people retreating when he pushed. Amara didn't retreat. She planted her feet and pushed back harder. It drove him insane. He was obsessed with her. The night the rains finally broke over Nairobi 3 weeks in, the sky cracking open all at once like it had been holding its breath, they were at her clinic. Late, the power flickering, rain hammering the tin roof so loud they had to lean close to hear each other. She was tired. A double shift, a patient she couldn't save, the particular exhausted grief that lived in her eyes on the worst days. She wasn't crying. Amara didn't cry in front of people. He had learned that quickly, but she was quiet in a way that said she was holding something heavy. He didn't try to fix it. She didn't offer solutions or optimism. He just stayed close and let her be heavy, and didn't make her feel like she needed to perform recovery for his comfort. After a while, She looked at him. The way she looked at him in that moment, like she was shocked to find him still there. Like part of her had expected him to leave, cracked something open in his chest that had been sealed for years. He kissed her. Or she kissed him. They could never agree on that afterward. What they both agreed on, what neither of them could dispute, was that nothing was the same after. The rain came down, the city disappeared, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Ryun Seo-jin was not a mafia boss or a successor, or a weapon his family had spent 20 years sharpening. He was just a man, with a woman who saw him completely, who wanted him anyway. He told her he would come back. Standing at Jomo Kenyatta Airport, her face in his hands, the Nairobi sun brutal and golden over everything. She had worn yellow that day, a bright, defiant yellow dress that he would remember in uncomfortable detail for the next 7 years. Come back, she said, not desperate, just certain, the way she said everything. Don't make me the woman who waited. You won't be, he said, I promise. She looked at him for a long moment, that quiet, measuring look that always felt like she was weighing, not just what he said, but everything underneath it. Then she kissed him once, hard, and stepped back. I'll hold you to that, she said. He walked through the departure gate. He did not look back. He told himself later it was because looking back would have made him stay. Which was probably true, which was exactly the problem. Seoul swallowed him whole. His father collapsed 4 days after he landed massive stroke, 3 days in the ICU, 1 month of uncertainty that turned the entire syndicate into a political battlefield. Factions moved, alliances shifted, men who had smiled at his father for decades showed their real faces within weeks. Seo-jin had no choice. He stepped up, he fought, he won brutally, efficiently, in the way his father had always known he would. He took the throne at 27, and sealed it in blood before his 28th birthday. He picked up his phone to call Amara 47 times in the first year. Every single time, he thought of what he could offer her. A life where she became a target, where the people he loved became weapons used against him. He had watched his father lose people that way. A cousin, a woman his father had loved before his mother. Names never spoken aloud in the family, but remembered in the way absences are remembered, the shape of what used to be there. He couldn't do that to her. He put the phone down 47 times. He told himself he was protecting her. He told himself that every single day for 7 years. What he never once let himself think about, the thought he buried so deep it might as well not exist, was that she might not have been alone when he left, that she might have been carrying something of him. Back to the present. The corridor outside the Grand Hyatt's main hall was cold, white, and completely silent, except for the muffled chaos leaking under the double doors behind them. Seo-jin stood 3 feet from Amara and tried to breathe normally. Up close she was different, and exactly the same. Older in the ways that meant she had lived sharper edges, a few lines near her eyes, something in her posture that said she had carried weight for a long time and had built herself around it. Still breathtaking, still wearing it like she didn't know. The red dress, the amber in her hair, the steady dark eyes that had always seen too much. Behind her, at the end of the corridor, his sons sat on a bench. His sons. The words landed in his body like something physical. He had thought them twice now, and they still didn't feel like language. They felt like a door opening in a room he hadn't known existed inside himself. Kai was asleep, small head tilted against the wall, blue shirt slightly rumpled, lashes fanned against his cheeks. Even unconscious, he looked like Seo-jin, in a way that was almost violent in its clarity. Koa was awake, sitting straight, one hand resting on his sleeping brother's arm, protective, automatic, the gesture of someone who had been doing that job for a long time. 6 years old and already someone's guardian. He learned that from her, Seo-jin thought, that instinct, that stubbornness, that refusal to leave the person beside you. He looked back at Amara. 8 months, she said before he could speak. That's how long Kai has been sick. Aplastic anemia, his bone marrow is failing. Koa isn't a match. I'm not a match. The donor registry came back empty 3 months ago. She paused, one breath, controlled. You're the last option. The words hit differently than they should have. Not just as information as weight, the weight of 8 months of fear she had carried without him. 8 months of hospital rooms and test results, and holding it together for 2 6-year-olds who needed their mother to be a wall. And if I'm not a match? He asked. The answer lived in the half-second before she spoke. Then I've run out of roads, she said quietly. Silence. Down the corridor, Koa looked up. Found Seo Jin's face immediately, like he already knew exactly where he was. He had known since the wedding hall. He had been tracking him, the way you track something important that you haven't decided yet whether to trust. Their eyes met. The boy didn't look away. Neither did Seo Jin. 7 years, he thought. I told myself I was protecting you. He looked at Kai sleeping, at the shadows under Amara's eyes, at Koa's small hand still resting on his brother's arm even now. I protected nothing. There's more, Amara said. Of course there was. 3 weeks ago, someone in Nairobi found out the boys exist. Someone who knows your family name, someone who knows what it would mean to a rival syndicate if they got to your heirs before you did. Her voice was completely steady. It was the steadiness of someone who had already been terrified for so long that terror had become her baseline. Men showed up outside their school, Seo Jin. I had 2 weeks to figure out what to do. This, she gestured briefly at the chaos behind him, at the destroyed wedding, at everything. This was the only move I had left. He absorbed this without expression. Then he turned to Choi, who had materialized silently at his shoulder. South exit, Seo Jin said quietly. 3 cars, armed, secondary route only. Tell no one, not the parks, not the council. No one. Choi didn't hesitate. He was gone. Seo Jin looked back at Amara. Seeing her eyes, relief and grief tangled together, the expression of someone who had hoped for exactly this outcome, and was still somehow devastated by what it meant. By how late it was. By everything that existed in the space between he showed up and he showed up 7 years too late. Amara. She looked at him. There was so much to say that none of it was sayable yet. Not here, not now, maybe not for a long time. Thank you, he said, for not disappearing. Something moved across her face fast, controlled, gone before it fully arrived. I didn't do it for you, she said. I know. Down the corridor, Koa had stood up from the bench. He was walking toward them, slow, deliberate, small chin raised at an angle that Seo Jin recognized from his own reflection every single morning. He stopped 2 feet away and looked up at Seo Jin with those dark, direct eyes. Then, in a voice that was quiet and careful and heartbreakingly serious for a 6-year-old, he said, Are you going to help my brother? The corridor went absolutely still. Seo Jin crouched down right there in the Grand Hyatt corridor, in his ruined wedding tuxedo, until he was eye level with his son. Yes, he said. Koa studied him for a long moment, weighing it, the way his mother weighed everything. Then he gave one small nod, dignified, certain, achingly familiar, and walked back to the bench to sit beside Kai. Amara made a sound beside him, the smallest sound, quickly swallowed. Seo Jin stood up slowly. His chest felt like something had been rebuilt inside it in the wrong shape, painful and necessary all at once. Behind the double doors, his wedding was in ruins. His engagement was over. An alliance between 2 of Seoul's most powerful crime families was turning to ash in real time. He had never been more certain of anything in his life. The safe room on the 3rd floor of the Grand Hyatt was not listed on any hotel floor plan. It existed the way many things in Seo Jin's world existed officially nowhere. Practically essential. Reinforced walls, 1 entrance, no windows, a round table, 6 chairs, a monitor feed pulling from 42 security cameras covering every corner of the building. Seo Jin had used it twice before. Once to end a negotiation that had gone sideways. Once to make a decision that couldn't be unmade. Tonight made 3. He sat across from Amara at the round table while Choi stood at the door and the twins slept on a pulled-out couch in the corner, Kai still deeply under. Koa fighting sleep with everything he had, until his body simply surrendered, his hand still loosely holding his brother's sleeve, even unconscious. Seo Jin had not stopped looking at them. He was trying to be subtle about it. He was not succeeding. Amara noticed. She noticed everything. But she said nothing, just opened the leather folder she had carried in from Nairobi and laid the documents flat on the table between them. Medical reports, test results, scan images. 8 months of paper that told the story of a small boy's body fighting a war it was slowly losing. Seo Jin read every page. He read them the way he read contracts completely, missing nothing, his face giving away nothing, but his hand, flat on the table, pressed down harder the further he got through the file. By the last page, his knuckles were white. He closed the folder, set it down carefully. He said, his voice was controlled, completely controlled, the voice he used when he was holding something enormous at arm's length and needed both hands free to think. Amara folded her hands. If you're a marrow match, and given your biology, the probability is significant. The procedure itself is relatively straightforward. Outpatient harvest, general anesthesia, low risk for the donor. She paused. For Kai, it means a real chance. Not a guarantee, but a real chance. And without it? Her jaw tightened, just slightly. We're looking at months, not years. The room absorbed that. On the couch, Kai shifted in his sleep, a small restless movement, one arm reaching out until it found his brother's shoulder. He settled again. Seo-jin watched this and felt something tear quietly inside his chest. I want the test done tomorrow, he said. I have everything we need. I brought the kit from Nairobi. She met his eyes. I was hoping you'd say that. You knew I would, he responded. I hoped, she corrected, precise as always. I didn't know. I haven't known anything about you in 7 years. The words were not delivered as an attack, they were simply true. That was almost worse. Seo-jin held her gaze. Amara. Not tonight, she said quietly. Tonight is about Kai. Everything else can wait. He nodded. She was right. She was always right about the order of things, what needed to happen first, what could survive being deferred. It was one of the first things he had loved about her. He filed that thought away before it could finish forming. PM. Not because he went looking, because she came to him. He was in the corridor outside the safe room, phone to his ear, issuing quiet instructions to his security team. When he heard her heels on the marble floor, that particular precise click, he had learned to identify over 18 months of carefully managed courtship and equally carefully managed distance. She appeared at the end of the corridor, still in her wedding gown, veil gone, hair beginning to come loose. Her face, stripped of the composed public mask she had worn all evening, was something he hadn't seen before, not distressed, not devastated. Calculating. Seo-jin lowered his phone. They looked at each other across the empty corridor. Are you going to apologize? He asked. For what? She said. The answer sat between them for a moment. You knew, he said. Not a question. He had suspected it since the moment in the wedding hall, not consciously but somewhere in the back of his mind where patterns lived, where his instincts assembled information faster than his thoughts could catch up. The way she had gone rigid when the doors opened. Not shocked, not confused, braced, like someone who had been waiting for a specific thing and felt it arrive. Mika walked toward him slowly, unhurried, the way she did everything, like the outcome was already decided, and the movement between here and there was just formality. I've known about the Kenyan doctor since before our engagement was finalized, she said. My family's intelligence team found her 8 months ago. The children, the medical situation, all of it. Seo-jin was very still. They told you, he said. My father told me. She stopped 6 feet away. Her eyes were dry. Her voice was the voice of a boardroom, clean and transactional. He said it was manageable, that the woman was in Kenya, the children were unknown, and if we moved the wedding date up and kept it out of public record long enough, there would be nothing anyone could do about it afterward. And you agreed, he said. I agreed that the alliance between our families was worth protecting. Something shifted in her expression, not guilt, not remorse, but something more complicated. A defense of a decision made with eyes open. This marriage was never about love, Seo-jin. You knew that. I knew that. We both walked into that hall this morning understanding exactly what we were doing and why. I walked in not knowing I had 2 sons, he said. Quiet, lethal quiet, the kind that was more dangerous than volume. One of whom is dying. Mika held his gaze. Would it have changed anything? Yes. How? Everything. The word came out with a weight that surprised even him. Everything would have changed. For the first time, something flickered in Mika's eyes. Not guilt, exactly, something more like the recognition that she had miscalculated. That the variable she had dismissed as manageable had turned out to be the only variable that mattered. My father also paid to keep it quiet, she said. The words came out differently, less boardroom, slightly more human, like she was finally putting something down she had been carrying at arm's length. There were doctors in Nairobi, 2 of them. They were approached 14 months ago, offered money to stay silent if the children's medical situation ever became relevant, to delay referrals, to slow the process. The corridor temperature dropped 10 degrees. Seo-jin looked at her. Say that again, he said. Mika's chin lifted, fractionally. The only tell that she understood exactly how close to something irreversible she was standing. My father's people approached two physicians in Nairobi's private sector. They were paid to manage the timeline. Of a sick child's treatment, there was silence. Of a sick child's treatment, he repeated. Each word separated and placed down like evidence. Mika said nothing. The thing that moved through Seojin in that moment was not rage. Rage was too hot, too fast. This was something colder, deeper. The particular fury of a man who had built his entire identity around a code brutal, yes. Violent when necessary, yes, but never this. Never a child, never a sick child's only chance at survival, traded like currency in a political arrangement. Get your father on the phone, he said. Seo-jin, get him on the phone, Mika. His voice had gone somewhere very quiet and very final. And then get your things and leave this building, both of you. She searched his face for something negotiating room, perhaps. A crack, a softness. There was nothing. The alliance, she started, is over. The words landed like a door closing. Mika looked at him for a long moment. Something passed across her face that might have been, in a different life, a version of regret. Not for what had been done. He didn't think she was built for that particular emotion. But perhaps for the outcome. For the fact that a plan assembled with precision over 14 months had collapsed in a single evening because one woman in a red dress had walked through a door. She must have been extraordinary, Mika said quietly. Almost to herself, she turned and walked, back down the corridor. Her heels precise and unhurried on the marble, her spine straight, her exit as composed as everything else about her. Seo-jin watched her go, then he turned and put his back against the wall and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. His wedding was over, his engagement was over. An alliance that had taken 3 years to negotiate and was supposed to end a cold war between two of Seoul's most powerful syndicates gone. The political fallout would begin by morning. The Park family would move against him. His own council would question his judgment. There would be consequences, layered and serious, that would take months to manage. He thought about all of this calmly and clearly. And then he thought about a small boy on a bench, who had walked up to a stranger in a corridor, and asked, in a voice too serious for 6 years old, "Are you going to help my brother?" He pushed off the wall, walked back to the safe room, pushed the door open quietly. Amara was still at the table, her head bent over her phone, reading something. She had taken the amber pieces out of her hair. It fell loose around her shoulders now, the way it had in Nairobi, the way it had lived in his memory for 7 years, refusing to be evicted. She looked up, read his face immediately, the way she always had, the way that had always been slightly terrifying and deeply wonderful in equal measure. "What happened?" she said. "Mika's family knew about Kai," he said. "They paid to slow his treatment." Amara went absolutely still. The blood left her face, not dramatically, not with a gasp, but in the quiet, devastating way of someone receiving information that retroactively rewrites 8 months of their life. 8 months of chasing dead ends and unexplained delays and doors that should have opened and didn't. Her hands flat on the table, pressed down slowly. "How long?" she said. Her voice was very controlled, the way it got when she was containing something enormous. 14 months. Her eyes closed. 1 second, 2. When they opened, something had changed in them, a fury so deep and so cold it looked almost calm. "My son," she said, "has been sick for 8 months. The first referral was delayed by 4. The donor registry search started 3 months late." She stopped, reconstructing, the math assembling itself in real time against everything she had accepted as bad luck, as the broken system, as the painful randomness of a cruel disease. None of it had been random. "Amara, don't." She stood up from the table, smoothly, controlled, walked to the window. There was no view, just a wall panel. But she stood there anyway with her back to him, her arms folded and her shoulders perfectly straight. He gave her the silence. He had learned that much about her. That she needed to be the one to choose when to speak and when to hold it. 30 seconds. 60. Then she turned around. Her eyes were dry, her face was composed. But underneath it, underneath all that extraordinary discipline, something was burning so hot it had gone quiet. "What are you going to do about it?" she said. Seo-jin looked at her across the room, this woman who had raised his sons alone, who had fought for Kai through 8 months of what she now knew had been a deliberately broken system, who had walked into a Korean Mafia wedding in a red dress because she had nowhere else to turn. "Everything," he said. On the couch in the corner, Kai made a small sound in his sleep. Koa's hand, even unconscious, tightened on his brother's sleeve. They moved at 1 a.m., 3 black vehicles, no advance notice, no convoy formation that was amateur, predictable, the kind of thing that got people killed. Instead, Choi split them across 3 different exit routes, 30 seconds apart, rejoining at a single point 6 kilometers from the hotel. Seo-jin rode in the middle vehicle with Amara and the twins. Kai had woken up during the transfer groggy, confused, clinging to his mother's side with the particular grip of a child whose body had learned that the world was not always safe. He hadn't cried. He'd just pressed his face into Amara's neck and stayed there, one small fist bunched in the fabric of her red dress. Koa sat on the other side of Amara, upright, watching the city slide past the tinted window with those dark, serious eyes. Seoul at 1 a.m., all neon and wet asphalt, and the cold, indifferent glow of a city that didn't care what was happening inside this car. Seo-jin sat across from them. He was watching his sons. He kept thinking he should stop, that it was too much, that it was obvious, that a man in his position should be on his phone managing the 17 simultaneous crises his evening had generated. His security team was running threat assessments. His legal counsel had called 4 times. 3 senior members of his council had sent messages that ranged from concerned to furious. He hadn't answered any of them. He was watching Koa watch Seoul. The boy's reflection floated in the tinted glass small face, serious expression, one hand resting on his knee with a stillness that was almost adult. He looked like someone who had spent a lot of time in the passenger seat of difficult journeys and had learned to make himself useful by staying calm. Who taught you that? Seo-jin thought. He knew the answer. As if feeling the weight of the attention, Koa turned from the window, found Seo-jin's eyes across the dark car. Neither of them looked away. Seoul is loud, Koa said finally, matter of fact. No preamble. Seo-jin blinked. It is. Nairobi is loud too, but different. Koa considered this with the gravity of someone delivering a research finding. Nairobi is loud like it's alive. Seoul is loud like it's trying to prove something. Amara made a sound beside him, small, involuntary, something between exhaustion and pride. Seo-jin stared at his 6-year-old son. That's, he started. Accurate, Koa said. I was going to say perceptive. Koa nodded, apparently satisfied, and turned back to the window. Seo-jin looked at Amara over the boys' heads. She was already looking at him, something unreadable in her eyes, the layered expression of a woman watching a man meet his children for the first time, and feeling 17 different things about it simultaneously. He wanted to say something real, something that acknowledged the size of what was happening in this car, in this night, in the 7-year chasm between Nairobi and now. The car turned sharply. Choi's voice came through the earpiece. Possible tail. Black sedan, 3 cars back, switching to Route 2. The moment collapsed. Seo-jin's hand went to the piece at his hip, automatic, practiced, the reflex of a man whose body had learned to treat comfort as a brief interruption between threats. Amara pulled both boys closer without a word. No panic, no questions. Just the fast, silent repositioning of a mother who had apparently also learned somewhere in the last few weeks that the world her sons had just entered operated differently from the one she had built for them in Nairobi. The tail dropped off 2 kilometers later. Choi called it a coincidence. Civilian driver, wrong place. Seo-jin didn't stand down until they were through the gates of the safe house. The safe house was not what Amara had expected. She hadn't said anything when the convoy pulled through the gates of what appeared to be a private estate in the hills north of Seoul. All clean lines and floor-to-ceiling glass, and the kind of deliberate, expensive minimalism that said this was designed by someone who understood that security and beauty are not mutually exclusive. But her eyes had moved across the entrance hall in that way. She had quiet inventory, cataloging everything, already calculating what this space meant about the man who owned it. Seo-jin noticed. You expected a bunker, he said. I expected something more. She searched for the word. Threatening? Utilitarian? I have those too. He said it without inflection. She almost smiled. The twins were asleep by 2 a.m., a proper bedroom, 2 beds pushed together at Koa's silent insistence, a nightlight sourced from somewhere in the house that cast everything in soft amber. Amara sat on the edge of Kai's bed until his breathing settled into the slow, deep rhythm of real sleep, her hand resting lightly on his chest, feeling it rise, fall, the way she had done every night for 8 months. Counting, reassuring herself. She didn't hear Seojin in the doorway until he spoke. "How do you do that?" he said quietly. "Every night." She looked up. He was leaning against the doorframe, jacket gone, tie loosened, the tuxedo shirt open at the collar, looking for the first time, all evening like something close to a man rather than a symbol. His eyes were on Kai. "You just do," she said. "When it's your child, you just do." He absorbed this, crossed the room slowly and crouched beside Kai's bed the same way he had crouched in the corridor for Koa, unhesitating, bringing himself down to the level of someone smaller. He looked at his son's sleeping face with an expression that had nothing guarded in it. Nothing performed, just raw, unprocessed, the face of a man who was only now beginning to understand the full dimensions of what he had missed. "Kai," he said quietly, just the name, like he was trying it in his mouth for the first time and feeling the weight of it. Amara watched him. She had prepared herself over the last 3 weeks for many versions of this moment. Denial, anger, transactional detachment, the man who agrees to help because it's strategically sensible and keeps everything at arm's length. She had prepared for all of it because she had needed to be prepared, because she could not afford to arrive in Seoul with hope she hadn't budgeted for. She had not prepared for this. For the way he looked at Kai like the child was something irreplaceable, that he had almost lost without ever knowing he had it. She looked away, stared at the wall, pressed down firmly on everything that had started moving in her chest. "Don't," she told herself. "Not tonight, not yet. Maybe not ever." They sat in the kitchen at 3 a.m. because neither of them was going to sleep, and the kitchen was where people ended up when the night was too big for beds. Coffee. Amara made it because she needed something to do with her hands. Kenyan habit, she had found ground coffee in his cabinet and briefly questioned what that meant before deciding not to. They sat across from each other at the kitchen island and for a while just existed in the same space. The way they used to, the particular comfortable silence of two people whose rhythms had once synchronized and apparently remembered how. "Tell me about them," Seojin said. She looked up. "Everything," he said. "From the beginning. I want to know everything I missed." Something crossed her face. He saw at the flicker of old pain, the instinct to protect herself, the very reasonable defensive impulse of a woman who had been left alone with a pregnancy, and 2 infants, and a career to rebuild, and had done all of it without a single word from the man sitting across from her. Then she set it aside, and she talked. She told him about the pregnancy, how she had found out 6 weeks after he left, alone in her clinic bathroom, sitting on the floor for 2 hours before she could stand up again. How she had called his number once, and it had rung out, and she had never called again because she had her pride and her mother's voice in her head saying, "A woman who chases is a woman who loses herself." She told him about the birth, 31 weeks, terrifyingly early, 2 tiny boys in separate incubators for 3 weeks, while she worked her shifts and pumped milk in the hospital bathroom, and held it together through sheer force of will, because falling apart was not an option she could afford. She told him about Koa's first word, which was no, delivered at 11 months with startling conviction to a bowl of food he had decided he was finished with. She told him about Kai's laugh, how it arrived before anything else, before walking, before real words, this enormous, full-body laugh that seemed too big for such a small person. She told him about the school in Nairobi, where they both now thrived, Koa obsessed with maps and geography, able to name every country in Africa by age 4, Kai quieter, gentler, the one who collected injured birds and insects in shoeboxes and tried to nurse them back to health with the focused tenderness of someone who had decided that the world's broken things were his personal responsibility. Seojin listened without interrupting, without looking away, with the complete, undivided attention that she remembered that had always made her feel, in a way she had never quite experienced with anyone else, like the most important person in whatever room they shared. She hated that it still worked. She talked for an hour. At some point the coffee went cold, and neither of them noticed. When she finally stopped, the kitchen was very quiet. Seojin looked at her across the island. "I'm sorry," he said. Not as an opening, not as a negotiation tactic, just 2 words placed down plainly between them, carrying everything they were supposed to carry and making no attempt to carry more than they could hold. Amara looked at him for a long time. "I know," she said. Not "it's okay," not "I forgive you," just acknowledgement. The simple, devastating act of hearing him. It was somehow more painful than anger would have been. The attack came at 4:17 a.m. No warning, no build-up, just the sudden flat crack of the perimeter alarm, then Choi's voice in Seo-jin's earpiece cutting through the kitchen silence like a blade. East wall, 4 men, armed. They're already inside the perimeter. Seo-jin was moving before the sentence finished. Bedroom, he said to Amara, one word. She was already gone, bare feet silent on the floor, down the corridor, through the boys' door. Seo-jin pulled his weapon and moved to the hallway. The safe house's interior lights had cut to emergency red, a pre-programmed security response that turned the clean modern space into something that looked like the inside of a warning. Red light on white walls, shadows that moved wrong. Choi came through the east corridor with 2 men flanking him, hand signals, 4 hostiles, moving in a 2-2 split, 1 pair toward the main entrance, 1 pair circling toward the rear of the house, toward the bedroom wing. Of course, this wasn't a hit on him, this was a retrieval. Someone wanted the boys. Seo-jin felt something click over inside him, a switch he had thrown many times before, in many dangerous rooms, the one that turned everything else off and left only clarity. Cold, absolute, efficient clarity. He moved. The first man came through the rear corridor door at speed, professional, trained, the posture of someone who did this for a living. He cleared the doorway and swept left, and in the half-second before he could sweep right, Seo-jin was already on him. Fast, brutal. No wasted movement, the particular violence of a man who had spent 15 years learning that fights were won in the first 3 seconds, or dragged into territory where luck became a variable. And luck was not something he trusted. The man went down. The second one came through the same door 2 seconds later, and pulled up short at the sight of his partner on the floor. That single moment of hesitation, involuntary, human, and Seo-jin moved through it like it was a door left open. 2 down. Gunfire from the main entrance, muffled, suppressed. Choi's team engaging the front pair. Then silence. The kind of silence that arrives after violence and sits differently from regular silence. Heavier, more honest. Seo-jin stood in the red-lit corridor and listened to the house. Choi's voice in his ear. Front pair neutralized. Perimeter resecured. We're clear. He didn't move for another 10 seconds. Listening. Feeling the house. Then he walked to the bedroom. Amara had the boys behind the bed. Standard defensive positioning. Both children pressed against the wall, herself between them and the door. One of Seo-jin's backup pieces in her hand, held in a 2-handed grip that suggested she had done this before, or had trained for it recently. He stopped in the doorway. She looked up at him, eyes sharp, adrenaline running, the gun still raised. Then she read his face, lowered the weapon. Clear, she said. Clear. She closed her eyes. 1 breath. Then Kai's voice came from behind her, small, sleepy, confused. Mama, what's the loud noise? She turned immediately. The gun disappeared somewhere, handled with the quiet, practiced efficiency of a woman who had apparently decided at some point that the world her children had entered required new skills. She crouched behind the bed, gathered Kai against her, her hand on the back of his head. Nothing, baby. A door. Go back to sleep. Kai looked over her shoulder, found Seo-jin in the doorway, studied him with sleep-clouded eyes for a long moment. You're still here, Kai said. Seo-jin felt the words hit somewhere unarmored. Yes, he said. Kai considered this, apparently decided it was acceptable. He tucked his face back into his mother's neck and was asleep within 60 seconds. Koa had not gone back to sleep. He sat against the wall, his knees drawn up, watching Seo-jin with those clear dark eyes, not frightened, not confused. Processing. Koa processed everything, Seo-jin was learning, took it all in and turned it over until it made sense and then filed it and moved on. You fought them, Koa said. Yes, to protect us? Yes. Koa was quiet for a moment, then with a matter-of-fact gravity that seemed to be simply his natural mode of existing in the world, he said, Okay, just that, okay. Like a decision had been reached, like a door that had been slightly open had now been opened a little wider. Seo-jin sat down on the floor of the bedroom, right there, back against the wall, tuxedo trousers and all, and stayed. Amara looked at him across the dim room, Kai breathing slowly between them. Koa watching with those serious eyes. She didn't tell him to leave. He didn't. At some point. Koa fell asleep, sitting up against the wall. Seo-jin reached over carefully and settled him down against the pillow without waking him, fixed the blanket, sat back. Amara was watching him. In the soft amber of the nightlight she looked like Nairobi, like the clinic, like every version of her that had lived in his chest for 7 years, taking up space he had pretended was empty. "I have to ask you something," he said quietly. She waited. "When you walked into that wedding hall today," he stopped, tried again. "Were you scared?" She was quiet for a moment. "Terrified," she said. "You didn't show it. I couldn't afford to." She looked at the boys. "They were watching me. They needed to see me walk in like I knew exactly what I was doing." She paused. "So I did." Seo-jin looked at her, at this woman who had walked into the most dangerous room in Seoul in a red dress, with his children in her hands, because her son was dying and men with guns had shown up at a school gate and she had no one else, who had held it together through every second of the most destabilizing night of her life because 2 small boys needed their mother to be a wall. "You never stopped being extraordinary," he said quietly. Something moved in her eyes. She looked away. "Don't," she said softly. Not cold, not harsh, just careful, like someone stepping back from a ledge they had examined and decided they were not ready for. "Amara." "I said not tonight, Seo-jin." She looked back at him, and the expression on her face was the most honest thing he had seen all evening. Not anger, not longing, just the plain, exhausted truth of a woman who had loved someone completely, been left, survived it, rebuilt herself, and was not going to let one night, however enormous, however real, undo 7 years of carefully constructed distance. "Tonight we're here for Kai," she said. "Tomorrow we do the test. After that," she paused, "after that we'll see what's left to talk about." He nodded. The nightlight hummed softly. Kai breathed. Koa slept with his hand on his brother's arm, and Ryun Seo-jin sat on the floor of a bedroom in his own safe house and thought about what it meant to have everything he had sacrificed, still within reach, changed, guarded, rightfully cautious, and whether a man who had made the choices he had made deserved a second chance at any of it. He didn't have an answer, but for the first time in 7 years, he was still in the room, and this time he wasn't leaving. Morning arrived over Seoul like an accusation. Gray light pressing through the safe house windows, the city below still moving, still indifferent, completely unaware that the most powerful Mafia wedding of the decade had collapsed the night before, or aware, and simply continuing anyway, because Seoul did not pause for anyone's catastrophe. Seo-jin had not slept. He had spent the hours between 5 a.m. and dawn on the phone, quiet, methodical calls made from the study, while the rest of the house breathed in sleep. His counsel, his legal team, 3 senior lieutenants who needed to understand the new landscape before they heard about it from someone else. He gave information on a need-to-know basis and instructions on a no-questions basis, and the message underneath all of it was the same, delivered without being stated directly. Everything has changed. Adjust accordingly. By 7 a.m., he had a complete picture of the fallout. The Park family had gone silent, which was worse than noise. Silence from the Parks meant they were not reacting emotionally. They were calculating, building something measured and deliberate in the dark, the way they always built things, and whatever it was, would arrive fully formed rather than telegraphed. Divided, half of them urging containment and negotiation, half of them already treating the collapsed alliance as an opportunity to consolidate power that had previously been shared. Both factions were wrong in ways he didn't have time to explain yet. The media had footage. Of course they had footage, 800 guests, half of them with phones, the other half with professional photographers on retainer. By 6 a.m. there were 17 clips circulating. A woman in red, 2 small boys, a groom walking away from the altar. The images were everywhere, captioned in ways that ranged from dramatic to completely fabricated. His phone had received 241 messages since midnight. He had responded to 11 of them. He set the phone face down on the desk and thought about Kai's face when he'd said, "You're still here." Then he picked the phone back up and made the call he had been building toward all night. Park Dae-sung answered on the second ring. Mika's father, 63 years old, the kind of man who had survived 4 decades in the Korean underworld by being the most patient person in every room, who understood that the most effective weapon was time, and the most devastating move was the one that arrived after everyone had stopped watching for it. He answered like a man who had been awake all night and was pretending he hadn't. "Seo-jin, you paid to slow my son's treatment," Seo-jin said. No preamble, no warm-up, just the charge, placed down cleanly in the first 3 seconds, because Park Dae-sung was not a man who respected the performance of civility, and Seo-jin was not in the mood to perform it. Silence on the line. Then, these are complicated situations. Decisions are made to protect larger interests. My son, Seo-jin said quietly, is 6 years old. His bone marrow is failing, and someone in your organization paid 2 doctors in Nairobi to manage his treatment timeline. He paused. There is no version of this conversation where that sentence ends in a negotiation. Another silence. Longer. What do you want? Park Dae-sung said. The names of the doctors, every payment record, every communication, on my desk by tonight. Seo-jin's voice was the voice he used when the decision had already been made and what was happening now was simply notification. And then I want you to spend a significant amount of time considering the fact that I am choosing right now, in this phone call, to treat this as a debt rather than a declaration. And if I don't see it that way, Park Dae-sung asked, then we find out which of us has more to lose. He let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. You know the answer to that already, Dae-sung. That's why Mika is sitting in your house right now instead of my hotel room. The line was quiet for a long time. You'll have the records, Park Dae-sung said. Tonight, Seo-jin said. He ended the call, set the phone down, stared at the desk for a moment. Then he stood up, straightened his shirt. Still the wedding tuxedo. Still the same night, the most expensive ruins he had ever worn, and walked to the kitchen. Amara was already there. Of course she was. She had always been an early riser, one of the first things he had learned about her in Nairobi. The way she surfaced from sleep cleanly and quickly. Like someone whose mind started moving the moment consciousness arrived and didn't see any point in lying still once that happened. She had found tea somewhere in his kitchen, Kenyan chai, which meant she had gone through his cabinets with some thoroughness, which meant she had been awake for a while. She was standing at the counter in yesterday's clothes, the red dress replaced by what appeared to be an oversized shirt from somewhere in the house, her locks loose, reading something on her phone with the focused expression of a doctor reviewing information. She looked up when he came in, read his face the way she always did. You called the Parks. Yes. And? It's handled. For now. He went to the coffee machine, his hands moving through the familiar routine while his mind was still in 17 places simultaneously. The records will be in my hands tonight. The doctors who took payments will be reported to the Kenyan Medical Board by morning. I'll have my legal team file the formal complaint. Amara was quiet. He turned to look at her. She was watching him with an expression that was doing something complicated, something that had started as the careful, neutral face she had been wearing since the wedding hall, and was now, in the unguarded early morning light, becoming something else, something more layered. The expression of a woman who had arrived in Seoul with her defenses fully constructed and was finding, irritatingly, that some of the bricks were loosening. You didn't have to do it tonight, she said. Yes, I did. Why? He looked at her. Because it needed to be done before they had time to clean it up, and because, he stopped. Because you've been fighting alone for 8 months against something that was being made deliberately harder. The least I could do was make one phone call. She looked down at her tea. The test, she said. Can we do it this morning? I have a doctor coming at 9, private, fully cleared. She nodded. Wrapped both hands around her mug. Outside the kitchen window, Seoul was turning gold at the edges, the sun burning through the gray. The city beginning its day with the relentless energy of a place that treated every morning like a fresh argument it intended to win. How did you sleep? He asked. I didn't. Me either. She almost smiled. Almost. Some things don't change. The words arrived and then sat between them, carrying more than they were probably meant to, the way small true things often carried more than large performed ones. Some things don't change. He thought about a back porch in Nairobi, rain on a tin roof, her face in the dark. He thought about an airport, yellow dress, a promise. He set his coffee down. Amara. She looked up. I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. Her expression shifted, the careful neutrality returning, the defensive brickwork reassembling with quiet efficiency. But she nodded. He came around the kitchen island, not close. He stopped a few feet away, giving her space, respecting the distance she had established last night and every night for 7 years. He stood there in his ruined tuxedo in the early morning light of his own kitchen, and looked at the woman who had walked into his wedding with his children, and his conscience, and everything he had spent 7 years pretending he didn't miss. I told myself I left to protect you, he said. I told myself that for 7 years, and there was truth in it, the life I came back to, the things that happened in those first years. You would have been a target. The people around me paid for being close to me. I had seen it happen. I was afraid of it happening to you. He paused. But that's not all of it. The other part, the part I've been less honest about, is that I was also afraid of what you were to me. No one in my life had ever seen me the way you did. And I didn't know what to do with that. Men in my world don't build lives around people who see them clearly. They build walls. Keep moving. Treat love like a liability. He stopped. That's what I did. I turned you into a liability I was protecting myself from, and I called it sacrifice. The kitchen was very quiet. Amara was looking at him with those dark, steady eyes. Not crying, not collapsing, just listening, receiving. The way she had always received difficult things without theatrics, without retreat, just the full weight of her attention on whatever was being said. I know what I cost you, he said. The pregnancy alone, the birth. Those first years with 2 infants and a career and no one beside you. And then Kai's diagnosis on top of everything else, 8 months of fighting for him, while someone deliberately made it harder. He shook his head. There's no accounting for that. I'm not trying to account for it. I need you to know that I understand what it is, what it costs. I'm not going to walk back in here pretending 7 years can be explained away with one honest conversation at 3 a.m. He looked at her. But I need you to know that I never stopped, he said. Not for a single day. Whatever I told myself about why I stayed away, I never stopped. You were there every day, in the back of everything. The thing I moved around and planned around and tried to live around. His voice was quiet and completely steady, not performing, not building to something, just telling the truth plainly. I love you. I loved you in Nairobi, and I loved you every day I didn't call, and I love you right now in this kitchen, at 6 a.m. with everything falling apart around us. That's not going to change. I don't know what to do with it, and I don't expect you to do anything with it, but I needed to say it. Once. Clearly. Silence. The coffee machine clicked softly behind him. Amara looked at him for a long time, the longest she had looked at him without speaking since the wedding hall. He could see her processing it, not the words. She had heard the words, but the weight underneath them. Measuring it against 7 years of absence. Against the boy sleeping down the hall with failing bone marrow. Against the woman she had built herself into in the space his leaving had created stronger. More certain. More fully herself than she had been at 25 in that Nairobi clinic. She set her mug down. Folded her arms, not defensively, just thoughtfully. The way she stood when she was about to say something that had been assembled carefully. I believe you, she said. He held very still. I believe that you love me, she continued. I believed it in Nairobi, and I believe it now, and honestly that's almost the hardest part. Because it would be so much easier if you didn't. If this was just a man who used a young doctor and left and felt nothing. She paused. But that's not what happened, and we both know it. She looked at him steadily. Here is what I also know, she said. I am not 25 anymore. I am not the woman who waited in a yellow dress at an airport believing the best because she was too in love to consider the alternative. I rebuilt myself after you left. It nearly broke me, and then it made me, and I am not going to let one night, however real, however enormous, undo the person I became in your absence. Her voice was quiet and completely certain. I worked too hard for her. I'm not asking you to undo anything, he said. Then what are you asking? He was quiet for a moment. I'm asking for the chance to be someone worth choosing, he said. Not tonight, not because of Kai or the twins, or because we're in the same building at 6 a.m. Over time. Properly. I want to be their father really, fully, not from a distance. I want to be present. In whatever way you'll allow. And I want the chance, somewhere down the line, to show you that the man who got on that plane in Nairobi has been replaced by someone who understands what he threw away. The kitchen held the words. Outside, Seoul had gone fully gold, now the sun up properly, the city blazing. Amara looked at him for a long moment, then she uncrossed her arms, and she said the thing that would make every single person watching this story lose their mind completely. I have thought about you every day for 7 years too, she said quietly. I hated you for most of them. Some days I still do. A pause. But I also know that I walked into that wedding hall yesterday with your children, and somewhere, underneath the terror and the desperation and everything else, somewhere very small and very guarded and very stupid, I was hoping that you were still the man I knew. She looked at him. Don't make me regret finding out that you are, she said. He took a breath. Mama? They both turned. Kai was standing in the kitchen doorway, small, rumpled, one hand rubbing his eye, the other holding the hem of his shirt. He looked between his mother and the tall man in the wrinkled tuxedo with the expression of a 6-year-old doing complex social math. "Why are you both awake?" he said. Amara crossed to him, immediately crouching, pulling him into her arms, pressing her face into his hair. Kai submitted to this with the fond, slightly resigned tolerance of a child who had accepted that his mother expressed love through physical contact, and had made his peace with it. Over his mother's shoulder, he looked at Seo-jin. "Are you making breakfast?" Kai asked. Seo-jin looked at his son, at the boy who had his jaw and his mother's eyes, and 8 months of illness in his small body, and somehow still led with appetite and curiosity and the assumption that the world was a place that would generally provide breakfast if you asked. "Yes," Seo-jin said. Kai nodded approvingly. "Koa wants eggs. He always wants eggs. How do you like yours?" Kai considered this with the full gravity it apparently deserved. "Scrambled, but not too scrambled. Mama makes them too scrambled." Amara pulled back from him. "Excuse me. Too scrambled, Mama. Absolute, unrepentant." Seo-jin went to the refrigerator. For the next 20 minutes, in the kitchen of a Seoul safe house, while outside a mafia war was building in the silence of a powerful family's wounded pride, Ryun Seo-jin made scrambled eggs for his sons. Koa appeared at some point, as promised, wanting eggs, and sat at the counter watching the process with the technical interest of someone conducting quality control. He asked 2 questions about technique that suggested he had either watched a lot of cooking or had very high standards. Probably both. Kai sat beside him, kicked his legs against the stool, talked about Nairobi, about his school, about a bird he had found injured in their garden 2 months ago, and nursed back to health with a dedication that his teacher had apparently described as concerning in its intensity. Seo-jin listened to every word, made notes in the part of himself that was trying urgently and imperfectly to catch up on 6 years in a single morning. Amara stood at the counter with her chai and watched all of it with an expression that she was working very hard to keep neutral and was not entirely succeeding at. At 9 a.m., the doctor arrived. The test took 12 minutes. A simple swab. Seo-jin sat across from Kai at the kitchen table and let the doctor work, and Kai watched the whole process with the serious, focused attention of a child who had been in too many medical settings to be frightened by them anymore, but had retained enough curiosity to find them interesting. "Does it hurt?" Kai asked, watching the swab. "No," Seo-jin said. "Good." Kai thought about this. "When my doctor does my tests, it doesn't hurt either, but sometimes I'm scared anyway." He looked up. "Are you scared?" Seo-jin looked at his son. "A little," he said honestly. Kai nodded seriously. "I'll hold your hand if you want. That's what Mama does for me." Something happened to Seo-jin's face that he had absolutely no control over. Amara made a sound from across the kitchen, quickly converted into a cough, and looked very deliberately at the window. "I'm okay," Seo-jin managed, "but thank you." Kai shrugged, with the magnanimous air of someone who considered this a standard service he provided. The doctor left with the samples. Results in 72 hours. 72 hours. 3 days spent in a safe house in Seoul. The Park family worked behind closed doors while the media spread stories. His counsel debated, Kai offered his usual commentary, and Koa analyzed the city from the window. Amara moved through it all, a woman deliberately holding back from desiring things she hadn't yet decided she could have. 3 days. On the 3rd night, Seo-jin found her on the safe house roof, a flat terrace, Seoul spread out below in all its impossible blazing immensity, the Han River a dark ribbon, cutting through the light. She knew he was there without turning around. "It's beautiful," she said, "about the city." "Yes," he said, "not about the city." She turned, read his face. Her breath shifted. "The results came," she said, not a question, "an hour ago." She held very still. "And?" He crossed the rooftop, stopped in front of her, and for the first time, all week, the first time since a wedding hall in the Grand Hyatt and a red dress and a 7-year silence and 1,000 things said and unsaid in the space between them, he let her see everything. No control, no management, just the full unguarded truth of a man standing at the edge of the most important moment of his life. "I'm a match," he said. Amara's face broke. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly, completely, the way things break when they have been held rigid for a very long time, and the reason for holding them rigid is suddenly, finally, removed. She pressed both hands over her mouth. Her eyes filled and she let them, for once, without fighting it. Without performing composure for anyone including herself, Seo Jin stepped forward and put his arms around her. She let him. She pressed her face into his chest and held on with both hands and shook just slightly, just once, and then steadied, the way she always steadied. But this time she didn't pull back after. He held her in the Seoul night, with the city burning below them, and his heart doing something enormous and wordless. And he thought about a Nairobi clinic in the rain, and an airport in the gold morning light, and 2 small boys asleep downstairs, and the 72 hours of scrambled eggs and geography lessons, and a 6-year-old who had offered to hold his hand. He thought about everything it had cost to get here, everything it would cost to stay. He had never been more certain of anything. She pulled back eventually, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand quickly, practically, very Amara about it. Looked up at him. The Seoul skyline blazed behind her. Her locks loose, her face open, every wall she had arrived with either lowered or visibly fragile in the night air. Seo Jin, she said, yes. I need you to understand something before this goes any further. Tell me. She looked at him steadily, the old look, the Nairobi look. The one that had always felt like being read at a depth that should have been uncomfortable and somehow never was. I am not the girl from the clinic, she said. I am not waiting at any airport. I have a life in Nairobi, a practice, a community, patients who need me, a home I built from nothing. My sons have roots there, they have a language and a culture, and a history that belongs to them, and I will not let it be replaced or overshadowed or treated as the lesser half of what they are. Her voice was quiet and absolutely certain. If you want to be their father truly, fully, not as a gesture or a guilt response, then you show up, consistently, in the ordinary moments, not just the dramatic ones. You learn Swahili. You know their teachers' names. You are present in the ways that are unglamorous and inconvenient and don't make you look like a hero. She paused. And me? She stopped, looked at him. I am not a prize at the end of a redemption arc. I am a person, with history, with damage that has your name on it. If you want me really, not romantically, not because we're on a rooftop in Seoul and the moment is cinematic, then you earn it. Slowly, honestly, without pressure and without guarantees. The city hummed below them. I'm not asking for guarantees, he said. Then what are you asking for? He looked at her, this extraordinary, infuriating, irreplaceable woman who had loved him honestly, and survived his absence, and raised his sons, and walked into his wedding in a red dress, and offered him, against every reasonable instinct, a fraction of the door. A chance, he said. That's all. Just don't disappear back to Kenya forever. Give me the chance to show you I understand what I'm asking for this time. Amara looked at him. The Seoul wind moved through her hair. Down below, somewhere in the safe house, a light was on in the boys' room. She looked at the light for a long moment. Then she looked back at him. You have one chance, she said quietly. One. Not because you deserve it, you don't, not yet, but because my sons deserve a father who shows up, and because... She stopped, looked away, back. Because I am tired of being the only one who remembers Nairobi. The words landed in his chest like something coming home. He didn't move toward her, didn't push, just stood in the Seoul night and let the words be what they were, not a yes, not a no, but a door. Barely open, honestly offered. I'll remember it every day, he said. She held his gaze for one long final moment. Then she turned and walked back toward the rooftop door. At the threshold she stopped, looked back at him over her shoulder, and for just a second, in the glow of Seoul's skyline, she looked like a woman in a yellow dress at a Nairobi airport, like the beginning of something, like the terrifying, wonderful edge of a choice being made. The boys want pancakes tomorrow, she said. Koa says yours were better than mine, which is deeply offensive and completely unprovable. Seo Jin looked at her. Something split open in his chest, warm and enormous and devastating. 7 a.m., he said. She held his gaze for one more second. Then she was gone through the door and he was alone on the rooftop with Seoul burning below him, and a war building in the dark, and a match result on his phone, and one chance, one single, carefully granted, fully understood chance to become the man standing at the altar of his own life this time. Somewhere across Seoul, in a darkened office on the 43rd floor of a Park family building, Park Dae-sung ended a phone call and turned to the man standing at his window. Find out everything about the Kenyan woman, he said quietly. Her practice, her patients, her life in Nairobi. He straightened his cuffs. And find out exactly what she means to him.